how is turning McSweeney into a villain when he's already a parallel to somebody in a narrative sense going to forward the franchise into a more impressive experience, you know?
What I think this boils down to is you disagree with my idea. I think it's kind of as simple as that. That's not sort of what I'm arguing, is that it seems that you disagree with my idea and that's your personal opinion, not so much that I went off the rails and constructed a piece that doesn't make any sense in respect to the narrative, because there wasn't really a narrative to be tampered with in respect to McSweeney. There was too little detail for there to be a narrative that was set in stone that I, as you are suggesting, may have taken apart or taken in a direction that doesn't make sense in relation to the trilogy. So that's what I'm arguing, that you just feel that it doesn't make sense to you. It's not a decision you would have went with. But I got to push back on the idea that I can destroy a narrative of a character who didn't have much of a narrative.
Okay, fair enough that I do indeed disagree, because I'm not denying that I absolutely disagree. Even if you were to disregard the canon of the comic book itself, you would still have the very glaring parallels between the characters in the game itself. Even just disregarding the comic book, you still have the games themselves that you're competing with, and that you're trying to, you know, throw in to a more enjoyable experience as the next canonical, or I guess fan-made, quote-unquote canonical installation to the Sly Cooper franchise. But what you could do with McSweeney is like, hey, you know what's great about Sly 3 is that it left Sly, he finally gets his, you know, his honey, his girl, but he leaves behind his friends, which leaves something of an unresolved tension. How about somebody who is literally related, like, to the gang, in a sense that he was with, he ran with his father back in their heyday, and he's the one element that helps to keep everybody together. You know, he can help Sly meet back up with his buddies in a way that doesn't bring him back into crime and completely invalidate the entire point of Sly 3 by having Sly come back to a life of thievery, but just show that despite their now ethical differences, that they can still be friends.
I don't think it invalidates Sly 3. I think it unravels more to the story. I don't think it completely would invalidate what happened in Sly 3. I think it would extend the story in terms of it seeming as if Sly didn't have any unfinished business left, that his mission had been completed, but there was this one piece left to the puzzle that hadn't quite been addressed, that nobody saw coming.
What, that Carmelita was right and that a life of thievery isn't an adequate outlet for heroism? Because I think that putting Sly right back into a life of thievery would absolutely invalidate that entire moral.
You cannot make a fourth game without invalidating Sly 3, period. So which route do you want to go? That's up to the individual that's writing a follow-up to Sly 3. Well, look at the way they did it in Thieves in Time. They invalidated it in the worst fucking way possible. You don't have to go that silly, but any route you go is going to invalidate the way they wrapped up Sly 3. Thieves in Time decided to do it by making Sly like an addict of crime. Like, I just decided the itch came back and I had to jack some
complete
shit.
Klepto.
Right. So is it... What would anybody prefer? He's now a criminal addict that just the old itch came back, he had to jack something, and now a whole story unfolds, or he was pulled back into it. And now this time it's the most horrific thing in the world. And this time, now there's a spotlight on Carmelita. Like, what's run its course that we haven't addressed? How about that side of the legality of things? That you've been rocking with a criminal as a respected detective forever. I think, I don't know, man. Maybe I'm just patting myself on the back, but I think that'd be an interesting arc. I do personally.
How do you figure that a Sly 4 could not be made without invalidating the games that came before it?
If he had to take on another mission involving crime, that invalidates what you were praising so heavily about Sly 3, that he learned that crime is not what it's about and he just wants to settle down with his woman. Anytime he has to pick up the cane once again and go back into the world of crime, it sort of unravels that ending, which is what every comeback sequel has to do. You have to understand, this would be a comeback sequel, the same way Thieves in Time was a comeback sequel. Now, if you ever watch a movie franchise, to step out of gaming for a second, something that really only specifically handles storytelling, if you ever watch a movie franchise that was like, let's say a trilogy, or let's say a 4 4-part series that was big back in the 80s or big back in the 90s, an iconic character. They come back 10, 15 years later. If they want to address the narrative at hand, they have to unravel a little bit of that last piece, just as to have an excuse for the character to come back, but they do everything they can to make up for it. It's like we had to tweak that one little thing. I don't know, an example off the top of my head was in the Rocky series. At the end of the Rocky series, in the last one that ended off in 1990, he suffered brain damage. And then in the 6th movie, where he comes back in 2006, 15 or so years later, they just never addressed the brain damage. So you could say right then and there, Rocky can't come back, he's brain damaged, and he's fighting again. And in that movie, he passes a license to be able to fight. There's that one little thing that you just had to drop in order for it to be possible, but it was a brilliant film. I think the same thing would have to be done with Sly.
Okay, so I'm going to just ask, do you remember what glorious window was left open in Sly 3 that could absolutely be harped on as a method for some kind this might be overwritten in fanfic, but oh no, it's not a trick question, but do you remember what glorious window was left open in Sly 3 that could have opened all kinds of possibilities for a Sly 4 without invalidating what came before it?
No, go ahead, tell me about it.
Constable Cooper. Carmelita comes over going, "Oh no, Sly, are you okay?" And he goes, "What happened? Who am I? Who are you?" And she goes, "You're my partner, Constable Cooper." They left a whole window open right there.
All right, so now what would follow that? So a game where Sly thinks he's Constable Cooper and he's a cop now?
I wouldn't say thinks. I would say he absolutely remembers his friends. And somebody who could absolutely help to rejoin him with his friends in a way that's satisfying to both his ethical code and the law would be somebody who's maybe friends with someone who had a connection with his dad. And like I said, that might be overwritten and fanficky, but honestly, I think that would be
what would he be in that context, though? He would be a cop because Carmelita convinces him he's her partner, so he then leads a life thinking he's a cop?
She doesn't convince him that. Remember at the end of Sly 3, the whole gag of that thing was that so he remembers who he is.
He plays along with it?
Yeah, he plays along with it. Absolutely. He has
so you want a narrative to stem from him playing along with pretending he has amnesia and that he's Constable Cooper?
Yeah. I mean, that would honestly make a lot more sense to me than him going right back to a life of crime, knowing everything that's wrong with that and all of the people he hurts in the process of doing so.
I have a hard time thinking you could pull a whole compelling story out of that.
Well, explain. Why do you feel that would be... How would you say, more contrived or something, probably?
My style of doing sequels is just keeping it as close to the originals as I can. And part of me keeping it as close to the originals as I could is keeping it in the theme of the past coming back to haunt Sly and Sly's father's unfinished business coming back to haunt him. It just seems that that's what all three of the original games was about. And I mean, somebody say that I'm wrong and not just be pulling shit out of their ass.
Okay, I guess the best argument towards that could be probably Clockwork himself, who was not necessarily a nemesis of, what's his name, Connor or something, or was that just a fan name?
He wasn't a nemesis, that's just why he killed him?
Well, the Thievius Raccoonus was what, he took.
All right, what you just said is factually incorrect.
That's
factually incorrect.
That was he wasn't a nemesis of the name Cooper and not just his dad himself, because it seems to me that in Sly 1, Clockwork had been around for what he said, hundreds of years, thousands maybe, which means that he's encountered Coopers of all kinds. Okay,
but you're using a technicality with me. Being after the whole family line it falls into the same vein of him being after Connor. So, all right, maybe he's not after Connor strictly. He was after the whole line. But at that moment in time when he killed Connor, he was after Connor at the time.
Okay, but still...
So it's still Cooper history. I don't think that there's anything inconsistent, though. I really don't. I don't think you can make something entirely inconsistent by furthering the arc or twisting the arc of a character that had 30 seconds of screen time. I really don't see how it makes it inconsistent. I would really argue that you... and most of y'all that disagree with me would not have questioned this had Sucker Punch made it exactly the way I made it. I really
Oh.
think it would have put it into a different context, a different light, and especially the guys that blindly accept Thieves in Time, like, oh, it's a fucking horrific piece of shit, but it's legit. It's canon. It's industry. Some guy in his fucking basement in his bedroom in front of a microphone on StreamYard with 26 people viewing didn't put it together. So we accept it. I really think that'd be the case.